But do you see sometimes where buyer is not open to paying as much because seller thinks that we're still in 2021 and the asking multiple should be 4 times or 5 times, and you have to play that role of bad cop and good cop between the buyer and seller, kind of reaching to a comfort level for both of them. And how do you do that? How do you approach that situation where the seller doesn't want to lower the price, the buyer doesn't want to put the price that the seller is asking for? How do you usually handle that conversation?
Yeah, there's a lot of moving pieces to that. So, and first off, let's talk about like the timing. I would say, so we're at the end of 2022, like middle of 2022. So like in the summer, a lot of sellers still had really high expectations on multiples, right? Well, you get punched in the mouth a few times, and a lot of those sellers are now coming back to the market and saying, okay, like this is where the true market is. Or they're saying, I don't want to exit for this multiple. I just want to keep building my business, and that's totally okay. So I think if a seller is asking too much and a buyer is not able to meet them there, that a deal's not going to happen. And so I would say as a buyer, you probably shouldn't waste your time with a seller like that, because you could waste a lot of time. And with the seller, their number usually is something tied to like what they think they need for retirement, or some number or arbitrary number, rather than what the true value is of the business. And I've dealt with a lot of sellers like that as a buyer, where I'm trying to convince someone to sell, and they, I'm at this price and they're at that price. I end up just wasting a lot of time, in my opinion.
Let me put the question another way, because obviously, if I wanted to buy a business, well,
yeah,
who would be the right person to talk the seller about lowering the price? Would it be him directly, or should I go to you? Because obviously, you've gained the trust through the whole process of working with the seller. And if I tell you, hey, Ryan, I think the business is not valued at 4 times because this reason and the other one, do you have that power to kind of leverage a little bit into seller's mind and say, hey, are we able to bring the price down? Or is it always on the seller regarding what the price is going to be?
Yeah, good question. So there's a few things right there that I want to dive into, Ignacio. And one is you have sellers' expectations, you have brokers' expectations, you have buyers' expectations. But at the end of the day, the market is smarter than any 3 of us, 2 of us, 5 of us, right? So there have been times where I've launched a listing and we've had like 5 offers in 24 hours because it's this amazing business, right? And other times where I thought it was an amazing business, you launch and it's been crickets for 6 months, right? So at the end of the day, the market will correct you. It'll move you up, it'll move you down. The important piece is you're casting a wide net. From a buyer perspective, when a business is not, when you don't think the business is worth what the seller's asking for, I would say there's a few things. You want to tread that lightly. You don't just want to come in and say, hey, your business isn't worth this much. Like, well, those are fighting words, right? And that's just going to put up a guard. And you wouldn't do that if you're like, having a disagreement with your spouse. You're wrong, you're like, that's not how you do it. What I would say is you want to approach it, whether they have a broker, you do this with the broker, and you can also do this with the seller too, but you approach it as like, hey, this is where I'm coming from. These are the points that I see, or these are the financing options that I see, right? And so from a financing perspective, you can't just finance a business that's worth 6x, right? If they're asking 6x for it, well, it's incredibly difficult to finance that business unless the trajectory and the growth is like out of the roof, right? Like, and so you can actually bring the seller back down and say, look, like, I don't have a way to finance this. Banks say this, Boopos says this. There's no way to get in the middle of that. And so you start to bring real expectations down. And if that seller isn't ready to accept what the market feedback is, the seller isn't ready to sell, right? They have a certain expectation or goal, what they're looking for. And there are a lot of times that I talk to sellers and they're looking for X amount or X multiple, and the market just isn't going to bear that. And I say, great, like, that's an awesome exit goal. Why don't you go back and fix these 3 things within your business, and let's talk in 3 months or 6 months or 12 months, right? You need to build the business to be able to do that. And there are many, many businesses out there that just won't ever be sold because the seller's expectations are too high. So as a buyer, just tread lightly, show proof, but also do it in a way that is in an uplifting way, right? No, don't attack, because the second you attack, like, guards are up, you're on the bad side and you're not going to be able to get in, right? And sometimes it helps to actually give a little bit, give ideas on how to grow the business, give ideas of how you would want to grow the business and the structure of it, so that when you do, it's that give and take relationship where you're trying to explain to them where the business is at.
Absolutely. Great answer.